This is Undaunted.Life, a man's podcast. I'm your host, Kyle Thompson. Let's get into it. All right, guys, we got a special guest on the podcast today. His name is Jack Barsky. So Jack is a former sleeper agent for the KGB. Yeah, seriously. He's also an author, a Christian speaker, and an IT specialist. He actually spied on the United States from 1978 to 1988 at the behest of the Soviet Union. After the Cold War, Barsky became a U.S. counterintelligence agent, there you go. And he's also the author of his autobiography, Deep Undercover. So I really enjoyed this interview today. We didn't cover a lot of different questions, but we went deep in a lot of different areas. So we talked about what it was like growing up in old East Germany, what it was like growing up, in this kind of cultural milieu of atheism, but also, communism and the tenets of communism being forced down your throat, even at an early age, like kindergarten. But then we talk about how starting in the late 60s, he was approached by what he thought was a member of the Stasi, the German intelligence agency, but it ended up being a KGB agent, and where that led to him being, observed and then recruited to go into the KGB, deciding to join the KGB, and then being placed in the United States as a sleeper agent. And kind of, what does a sleeper agent do in the United States on a day-to-day basis? So we talk a lot about that. But then we talk about how at some point they thought his cover had been blown and how that led to him leaving the KGB and how he kind of defected, got out of the world of espionage and ended up serving the United States government. But at the end, we spent quite a bit of time talking about how he became a Christian and how growing up in Germany, like there weren't churches that people went to. There weren't theological discussions. There weren't even really Bibles around. So how do you go from that to decades later, after being a spy and doing all these crimes and hurting people and doing all that, to becoming a Christ follower? So I really enjoyed his story. And then at the end, we talk about how parents can help keep their children from being romanced by some of the more overt tenets of communism. So we talk about all that. I really enjoyed my time with Jack. So without further ado, let's get into it. Jack Barsky, welcome to Undaunted.Life, a man's podcast.
Yeah, I'm delighted to be there based on what you told me, what I can expect.
Yeah, I think we're going to have a good time. I think we're going to hit a lot of the high points about you, your life, and some of the things that you're doing to help warn some people in modernity about some of the ideas that they're being romanced by. But we need to set the foundation a little bit here beforehand, Jack, because I'm not sure that I've ever talked to somebody who grew up in the old East Germany. So let's start there. Let's start with your childhood. Let's start with what it was like growing up there.
Yeah, well, born in 1949, which was 4 years after the end of World War II, in one of the poorest sections of Germany, which was at the time when I was born, it was occupied by Soviet troops. So grew up in poverty, not the kind of poverty where you go hungry every day, but, there wasn't a whole lot going on. The medical services were almost non-existent. The village I grew up in had one doctor, and there wasn't a lot of medication to deal with the cold and strep throat and stuff like that. Nutrition was just not really sufficient. I can't remember ever having gone hungry, but it wasn't really healthy. We ate a lot of potatoes. I was lucky to have grown up in the country rather than in a city, because most big cities in Germany were bombed out and people didn't even have a roof over their head. My parents were both teachers, so I lived through puberty in nice buildings, apartments attached to school buildings. So that was okay. But, again, poor, Christmas, there may have been one present that I liked and everything else was stuff that I needed. But, we were not unhappy. We were just, everybody else was poor too. So we made the best of it. We played outside. We made our own toys, cardboard boxes and sticks that we took from trees and so on. So it was not an unhappy childhood. But in hindsight, what I provided for my children here is a lot nicer. That's for sure.
Well, it's kind of one of those things. It's like, You don't know what you don't know. And I know a lot of people that have done missionary work. They go over to these other countries and they see these people that don't have a lot of stuff
Yep.
that seem to be very, very content. And so that's
Yes.
a common through point that I hear in a lot of these conversations. And so, but today we're not talking about the indulgence of American capitalists. Let's go back to talk a little bit because you mentioned your parents. As far as I understand it, your father was a Marxist and a supporter of Lenin. And so that's fairly unique for you in terms of your upbringing. Is that correct?
Allow me to correct this a little bit. He was a party member, but he he joined because it was necessary for his career.
Gotcha.
He really he was also teaching classes that I was in middle school, and he towed the party line, but at home there was never any kind of ideological discussions and any kind of brainwashing going on. He even at one point considered putting up an antenna for us to be able to receive West German television. I remember that. And then he said, "No, we can't do this because the antenna is so big that everybody would know that what we're up to." So, so he was just a utilitarian, so to speak. And the brainwashing that I received did not happen at home. It happened in school and in all kinds of organizations where children and young adults could participate. And of course, in the media, big time.
Okay, well, let's talk a little bit about that brainwashing because I'm always curious about because we all take lessons from our childhood. Some is caught, some is taught, and so let's talk about kind of that milieu that you were living in as it pertained to some of these ideologies that you ended up following as you aged.
It started with kindergarten, and this was a very systematic attempt to inject communist ideology into our young brains. And you may well understand that communism, the whole idea of communism, is something that is so easy to fall for. It's about, getting rid of all evil in the world. Can't we all get along? Get rid of oppression. Just live in a paradise on earth. And so that's how it started in kindergarten. Okay. The little children, like 5, 6 years old, we had these little fairy tales. We had comic books, and it was all about just nice things that the human race is all. There's nothing but good people, and there's just a small set of very rich oppressors that we need to get rid of. Very gentle. That included songs, and it was just part of our life. So going into elementary school, I was already a little communist, and then at elementary school there was this organization that was called the Young Pioneers, and if you didn't join the Young Pioneers, your parents would be talked to. So Young Pioneers that now, in addition to school, there were activities where we would, do things to collect, for instance, nuts, to collect, it's a German word comes in as blocks English sometimes, collect metals that rusty old stuff that could be reused and stuff like that. And just to be helpful and be useful. And again, songs, at that point it wasn't television, but it was radio. There were some radio programs for children, and it was about a robot. Obviously that robot didn't exist, who was running around in the world doing good deeds. And then it got a little more hardcore, particularly as we got into high school. At that point in high school, we were taught, Marxist ideology as a subject. And when you just go forward in college, we even had a course, and I studied chemistry, hard science, but we had a course that was called scientific Marxism-Leninism. And at that point, I was ready to believe anything and believe that there was a science to what Marx had quote unquote discovered, which is the law of the evolution of mankind, and that would end in a worker's paradise. But we had to do our part to get there. So, and I understand why Marxism and communism most likely will never lose its attractiveness, because it's such a romantic notion, and what it does, it defies the fact of the human existence that we all have the seed of evil in us, and some of us, many of us, have learned how to manage it. But when you look at history, and I am an amateur student of history, when you look at history, the history of man is nothing but man killing other men, women. It's nothing but warfare throughout history. And if the world were to end, this would be in a nuclear conflict, and that's something I'm concerned about right now. But we don't know. There's no way to speculate. Even Jesus didn't know when the Father will make the world come to an end, as the world as we know it. So I can't join the folks that say, well, it's just around the corner, because they said this in biblical times and we're still here. So we have a responsibility to do what we can do to live our life the way Jesus showed us how it should be lived.
I would certainly echo that. And Jack, I'm curious, as you're growing up, I really appreciate you talking about, what it was like in elementary school, and then as you get into high school and college, and kind of how it really got more and more serious. Did you ever remember a time period or a particular class or teacher or group that maybe presented a counter ideal? Because obviously, if you look at the true tenets of Christianity, they don't jive with communism, Leninism, Marxism, socialism. It doesn't really jive at all. There are people that will make the argument where they will basically take pieces of Christianity without the context and apply it to something that fits their worldview. But do you remember anybody kind of giving you an alternate way of thinking, or was it simply, this is the way that you're going to be brought up and here's how you're going to be marinated?
Let me tell you something. This may sound odd, but it's the truth. The one example where a teacher was a bit of a contrarian was our music teacher. He was retired from being a conductor of a symphony orchestra. And one time we listened to Western radio, because that's when the Beatles were coming out, the Rolling Stones, and this great music that we all like, but it was forbidden. So one time a friend of mine and I went to the music teacher and asked him what he thought of the Beatles, and he said, "They're really good." Now, that was an extreme notion.
Yeah.
Other than that, anybody who voiced a contrarian opinion, and that could have been students, particularly in college, was immediately isolated.
Right.
And typically those were not the better students, because we all have learned how to, play our part in the collective. So it was all about the collective, no matter where we were. And contrary opinion, no. God, I had no idea that there was a God. I had no idea, and it was so dumb to think that the universe, we studied physics, chemistry, that the universe came into being out of nothing and then organized itself in the way into the complexity that we have today. That which is contrary to the third law of thermodynamics, in that a closed system will tend towards disorder. Period, not order. So there was just not enough rational thought, even though, and here's an afterthought, even though, because we, the East German rulers, knew that for our economy to have a chance, we needed to have scientists because we didn't have a lot of natural resources. There wasn't a lot of manufacturing going on. So we were supposed to, through science, create a strong economy. And so therefore they couldn't completely suppress rational thinking, right? You can't be a scientist and just feel your way through science, right? We have symptoms of that today, but ultimately that vestige of rational thinking that was never totally suppressed now resulted in the people rising up and surprising everybody and making that wall come down, because the thinking wasn't completely eliminated. Now what we have today, and I don't want to be like super pessimistic, but clearly we see that there is, particularly in our schools, the government-run schools, thinking is not that important.
No,
it's all about how do you feel and how can everybody be equal and how can everybody be fundamentally their own God. I tried that; it didn't work out very well.
It doesn't tend to work out very well for anybody, as it turns out. And I think in addition to that, what you're talking about, we'll get way more into this later on. When you have a feelings-based approach, you talked about hard science, studying chemistry. It doesn't matter how you feel about a bond or about something like that, or it doesn't matter how you feel about the periodic table. It doesn't change it. And yet we're living in this cultural moment where math is racist because it comes up with definitive answers to, specific questions. But again, we'll certainly get there. I want to go ahead and fast forward your story to the late 1960s. And so you were approached, as far as I know, and if any of these details are wrong, please correct me, but you were approached by what you thought was a German intelligence agency representative, so that would be the Stasi, to see if you were interested in the job. And this person ended up being a member of the KGB, and it started this recruitment process to work for the KGB. And I don't want to take any of your thunder, so how about you pick up the story from there?
Yeah. He was a German, but and I thought it was Stasi, but he turned out to be a volunteer working with the KGB. And so the second meeting I had with him, he introduced me to somebody who spoke with a Russian accent, and he told me, he introduced him. May I introduce Herman? We're working with our Soviet comrades, and then he disappeared. So this is how I got attached to the KGB. And that was I was not being recruited at the time. I was being observed over a period of 18 months because they were looking for a set of character traits that are required to be successful in the kind of job that I eventually did, namely being a lone wolf, illegal undercover agent. That is sort of like, it can't get any more demanding than that. So they were searching for people and checking me as to whether I was a good candidate. The recruitment actually then happened 18 months after I met Herman. And that was an interesting situation that upon reflection, it was a hard sell and was another test as to whether I would actually be qualified. Because the fellow who asked me, whether I was ready to join, when I said, I don't know, if, I hesitated a little bit. And then he said, well, I give you until tomorrow noon to make that decision. Okay. So, and then he said, we only work with people who can make tough decisions quickly. So that was a tough decision.
And so, Jack, what specifically, and I don't know if they told you or if you just surmised this, what made you a good candidate? What made them want to observe you for so long and then take you through the recruitment process and even put you to a decision?
So I didn't know that, and that was never disclosed to me. I found that out. There were a couple of ex-heads of the Directorate S. Directorate S was illegals in the KGB. Gave interviews after the KGB was already gone of what they were looking for. And there's a list of character traits. I'm going to give you some examples. And they were looking for really smart people. They were looking for people whose mind is fast. They were looking for people who had no problem adapting to different circumstances. They were obviously looking for people who embraced Marxism, Leninism for sure. And then, my favorite character trait is well-controlled inclination for adventure. This like put this all together. Somebody who has no problem going to another country, changing language, adapting to a new culture, and being all by him or herself. They did like to send couples, but if there was no suitable female, they sent me by myself. And, they did a good job. I never once met a KGB psychologist. I never took a personality test. They were just checking me out piece by piece by piece. I give you this one example. When I said yes, I thought I was already in. I really wasn't. I quit the university. I had a job as a teacher, assistant professor. And when I quit the university, I showed up in Berlin, and I was subjected to probably the toughest test there was that I wasn't prepared for, and I didn't know it was a test. So I meet my new handler. My first, it was my second sort of secret meeting where you go to a particular address outside, somewhere in the city, and you meet somebody who you don't know what they look like, and you exchange phrases, and you have something in your hand. In my case, it was some kind of a newspaper to disclose who you are. So I met this guy. He took me into his vehicle, and we exchanged a few niceties, and then he said, "I already have a task for you." I got excited. I said, "Yeah, what is it?" "You got to find a place to live."
Okay.
Now, this is in a country where all living spaces were controlled by the government. There was a shortage of housing. There were young couples with small children that still lived with their parents and shared bedrooms and stuff like that. There was an impossible task. So if I fail that task, I'm out. Okay. And, well, I found something, and I think what impressed Leonid, was his name, a lot, that I never once winced. I just said yes, and then I found myself in the suburbs, a one-room space that had a bed, a table, no chair, and a stove, the wood-burning stove, and running cold water. That was it. And I never complained. And this is when I sort of knew that I was in. This one day, Leonid showed up, and he handed me a set of keys. He said, "That's for your new apartment," because they could have given me an apartment right then and when I started. It was a test, and
Right.
I understand that was probably necessary to finally say, "Yeah, this guy can make something out of an impossible situation."
Hey guys, real quick, as you've likely heard me talk about on the show before, it took me forever before I started taking supplements of any kind. I was always nervous about taking like whey protein and creatine or really anything beyond that because I was just afraid of what was in the product and if it was going to like give me cancer someday or something like that. And I was always scared of these companies, these supplement companies, just cutting corners and using low quality products and eventually putting things in their products that could cause problems for me and my body. So I've always wanted to partner up with an American company that uses high quality ingredients in their supplements. And that's why I want to remind you guys that we are partnered with Joof Fuel. So Joof Fuel is Jocko Willink's American-based supplement company. So what are some of my favorite products that they make that I also use? They have the best tasting greens powder on the market. I love the peach flavor myself. They also make whey protein powder. The banana cream is my favorite. They make energy drinks. The Jocko Go energy drinks, my favorite. It's currently a tie between their iced tea lemonade and their pink lemonade flavors. I also use their Creole oil, their creatine, their vitamin D, and also their sleep aids. And they make a bunch of other stuff like ready to drink protein cookies, which are actually really delicious. My boys even like them, pre-workout powder, and much, much more. Guys, if you take your health and wellness seriously, then you've got to put high quality products in your body. Try Jocko Fuel out today by going to www.jockofuel.com. That's jockofuel.com. Use the promo code Undaunted to get 10% off of your order. Again, that's jockofuel.com, promo code Undaunted to get 10% off of your order. Well, it's really interesting, Jack, how you talked about, you never met with a psychologist. I mean, we live in an era right now where it's like, hey, if you want to know about yourself or know if you're compatible with this person, take this, quiz that takes 10 minutes online, and then it'll tell you everything about yourself and how you should act in the world and what types of jobs you should have. And yet their process was just very stoic and very calm and very patient, just to kind of see where you were going. And so, as you already mentioned, from the late 70s to the late 80s or so, you worked as a sleeper agent in the United States. And so some people might know what that is, but I want to know from you, what does a sleeper agent do? What does your day in, day out look like? What was your mission specifically as a sleeper agent for that decade?
Okay, so there's another interesting fact that I only found out many years after I quit the KGB, that the definition of a sleeper is somebody who operates in enemy territory to just integrate with society, to be at one point being woken up. And that was really what they never told me. The word sleeper was never spoken. They sent me with a couple of tasks. But I found out, again, in one of those interviews, that the most important value of my being in the United States was my being in the United States. And I put the dots together. At the height of the Cold War, there were like spy wars going on between the CIA and the KGB. So, and fundamentally, the vast majority of KGB agents in the U.S. were diplomats, either employed by the UN or ambassadors or whatever, diplomatic staff. And when they were found out to be doing something that has nothing to do with diplomacy, they were kicked out. And it became a game of retaliation. So you kick one of ours out, we kick one of yours out, and we don't even have to prove that they're no good. Now, and then 3 people were kicked out, and 3 people, there was retaliation with 3 coming the other way. Andropov, the head of the KGB, was concerned that diplomatic relations would be broken up altogether. And so now, if you put another couple of dots together, the most effective agents in that time period for the KGB were moles. Aldrich Ames, who was in the CIA, and Robert Hansen, who was a mole in the FBI. And they provided phenomenally valuable intelligence to the KGB. And how did they transmit that information? They had contacts with the diplomats. Well, if there are no more diplomats left, only the illegals, the moles, were left. Not the moles. I'm sorry. The sleepers were left. Yes, and so that, and the fact that I really was very well integrated in U.S. society was recognized by the fact that they gave me the second highest. They awarded me the second highest order decoration of the Soviet Union in my 10th year of existence here. That had to be approved by the government, not by the KGB. So anyway, they also gave me some tasks, and I thought my tasks, particularly, I was prepared to provide intelligence with regard to foreign policy. So they told me, eventually it would be great if I could have contacts with people that are in charge of foreign policy, or at least influence foreign policy. But I failed miserably in that because and my standing in society wasn't such that I could just befriend people like that. Now, over time, when I became a professional and made really good money, that would have worked, but that was a long game. The other thing where I don't know whether I was successful or not was I was supposed to operate as a spotter. Spotters just look for people that could be targets for recruitment, and and profile those people, and somebody else might actually contact them and try to recruit them. I don't know. I was never given any feedback. I profiled a number of students who most likely had a government career ahead of them. No idea whether that actually succeeded in anything. And I also had a task and I was told every KGB individual in a sort of enemy country had one military object assigned to them to occasionally visit to see if there's signs that the U.S. is preparing for war. All of that, they never really told me much of anything. They told me as much as they thought I needed to know to do my job. I was pretty blind. And lastly, I had this one task where I knew I was successful. They asked me to go find whether a defector, an individual who defected from the KGB in the early 50s, still lived in San Bernardino and taught at the University of California. And at this point, the name doesn't, I don't remember the name, but I found him. And interestingly enough, and I reported on that. Interestingly enough, 2 or 3 months later, I watched late night television, and there was this fellow giving an interview, and I found out that he was under a death sentence in the Soviet Union. I'm delighted to report that whatever they thought they want to do to him, they didn't do it. So he died from a natural death. So this is sort of the universe of espionage that I lived in. One more thing I forgot is at one point, for my last 2 years, I had an assignment to see if I could steal some technology, because the KGB, the Soviet government, was finally aware that with regard to particularly computer technology, they were falling far behind. And they couldn't buy stuff on the open market because it was were things technologies that were on the do not export list. So, I stole some software, but I don't think that was usable. I copied software, didn't steal it, because I was working as a computer program for an insurance company. But that was it. It's not what people think, the exciting life of a super spy who drives fast cars and has one pretty girlfriend after another and so forth. My first job was bike messenger, and then I became a computer programmer. Not very exciting, but again, according to them, I did the job. And I'm glad that this hand never touched a weapon. I had self-defense training, just not to fight with the FBI, just in case I'm attacked by robbers someplace in the park and while engaged in an operation. So there's nothing else I can add to this. The life of an undercover illegal. And one more thing I want to add: I met a colleague of mine, also a German, and he came to the U.S. with his wife, the original Americans, as a couple, and their only task was to live as an American in the United States. He got a job as an IT support person at Columbia University. He had no other job to do.
That's very interesting. I mean, you're weaving this. I mean, because it doesn't have all the the girlfriends and the car chases and the shootouts and all that, but the universe that you're describing is still very, very interesting. And one of the most interesting parts is about the patience that you have to have, and you constantly have to be careful about blowing your cover, becoming compromised. And as I understand it, in late 1988, you thought that your cover may have been compromised, and I believe that kind of led to your exit from the world of espionage. So take us through that process of thinking your cover may have been blown, and how that you eventually were no longer spying for the KGB here in America.
Let me start out with a thought that I was aware of, and I now am pretty sure that this was a valid thought. For somebody like me, illegals had a shelf life, because if we do the job really well, we become so used to that new person that we are and the new environment that we're in that we become vulnerable to defection. And so the idea was they were talking about 10 to 12 years, and then I'm coming back home. So I was in my 10th year, and there was no indication at that time that they were going to call me back, which was a surprise, but apparently I was too valuable. But something spooked them, and they were like extremely careful, cautious with regard to protecting us. Not like modern day Russia. Putin doesn't give a damn whether his folks are being discovered. He just enjoys that. If somebody like the Butina person was discovered, that raises fear in Americans, and I'm always being asked when I have public appearances. I'm always being asked how many more are there? Yeah, there's so no, the KGB was very protective of us. And apparently they had reason to believe that the FBI was on my tail. And so they activated the emergency procedure by putting a sign at a predetermined spot that I passed by every morning on my way to work. It was a steel beam supporting the 8 train going into Manhattan out of Queens. Excuse me. And I'm going, go to work. I'm not a morning person. And then I see the red dot. And, oh, shoot. I used the other S word. And not prepared for that at all. So, and the reason I said, oh, shoot, there was a person in my life that the KGB didn't know. And that was a 18-month-old daughter. And it so happened, and this is the point where I usually tell people that in my testimony that I give in churches, and it's entitled "God Had a Plan for Me." When I give examples where other people made decisions on my behalf without me knowing it, and that radically changed my life. So I was married in the U.S. Not to get too much into detail, I was married. And there was not a plan to have children. So the wife supposedly was on the birth control pills. And one day she decided because I told her that we wouldn't be married forever. It was to make her legal to get a green card. And I said, once you got your green card, we're going to divorce. And she wanted to hold on to me. So she decided to have a baby. I had no part of that decision. And that baby, so I could not possibly desert this woman and that small child. I always thought of myself as a good person, and God made me to be caring and taking care of people, particularly the ones that need taken care of. And so I didn't have enough money to put him into an apartment separately. So we moved in together, and I watched this child grow up. And something happened to me that snuck up on me. I was not prepared for that at all. It's like a massive attack of unconditional love. And when I show up in public and I mention that, And I address the men particularly. There's a lot of men who can relate to that, particularly when it comes to their children. And so, and I knew the end was coming, and I was trying to figure out how can I help for this child to have a good childhood, to not grow up in poverty. Her mother had only 4 years of schooling, and if she and the child are not, without support, my baby girl would have grown up in a slum. And I had no solution. I couldn't possibly ask the KGB to help me out there. That would have possibly landed me in jail because I hid something from them which was considered a very high risk. Going for an interview at the immigration to testify that I'm an American and this is my wife and we're applying for her green card. It worked, but anyway, so here I see the red dot and I'm going on to work. I didn't do much work that day. My mind was racing, but I played for time because I could. I could. They didn't know I could be in a hospital. There could have been all kinds of reasons why I did not do what I was supposed to do. Immediately go to a park in the Bronx where I had reserved documents, and then make a beeline to the Canadian border and say hello at the Soviet embassy in Ottawa, and they would have smuggled me out of the Western world. And I didn't do that. I went to work and waited on that was a Monday. On a Thursday, there was my regularly scheduled radio transmission, shortwave, and I listened to it, and there was a little more information. He said, we have reason to believe that the FBI is following you and you will be arrested soon. Activate the emergency protocol. Oops. I still was able to play for time because the radio could be broken. I could be disabled. At one point I was in an accident, a bike accident, and I couldn't operate for about 6 weeks because my right arm was in a sling. So I couldn't do much of anything. So and they knew that. So eventually they decided to figure out, am I still alive? Am I still operational in some way? And so one morning, December morning, it was still dark. I'm waiting for the subway, and there weren't too many people there. And to my right, there's a short man in a black trench coat, and he walks up to me and whispers into my ear, "You got to come home or else you're dead." Yeah, that's an interesting sentence to hear from a KGB agent.
So you hear that, and what did you think?
I'm a stoic, and I am also I have always lived by the motto, "Que sera, que sera, sera." And, shit happens, just like whatever. And even though I didn't believe in God at that time, I believe that somehow everything will always turn out the right way. So I had to take this seriously, because if what I was considering, if I break up with the KGB, they could easily interpret this as defection. And I did know that they did not treat defectors very well, to put it mildly. But I also, at this point now, I was forced to make a decision, because now I know that they know, I know that they knew that I knew. So there was no more stalling. So the following, I'm sorry, Thursday there was another radio transmission, and they invited me for a dead drop operation, for me to go to a park someplace at a a predetermined time, go to a predetermined spot to pick up a rusty old oil can that contained a passport and money to travel, because they didn't know whether my travel documents, the reserve documents, were still available. And so I went. And at this point, the only reason, the one reason that I went is to just collect the money. And I still hadn't made a decision what to do, whether I would use the passport and go to Canada. And background, this was the fourth or the fifth dead drop operation that we were engaged in the United States, and they all worked like clockwork. So I had no reason to believe that this one wouldn't work, because it wasn't a spot that I had found and described. There's no way that you could mistake this spot. It was in a park on Staten Island, where there was a small path into the park, and the entrance was marked by a sign that had something on it, a road sign that was nowhere else in that area. So you go like a couple of 100 feet into this park, and to your left there is a tree with a hollowed out bottom, and that's where you put the container. Okay, so I walk in there, and it was dark. There was nobody in the park. It was dark. I walk in there, and there was no oil can. I did a double take, and I walk around the tree, see maybe he missed a spot, and there was nothing there. And I went a little further out, and I spent about 15 minutes, and I gave up. And this is, as I'm walking out of this park, and, it sounds so dramatic, and I don't have to make it up, because it truly happened. And as I'm walking out of this park, my subconscious fed me the two words, I'm staying. Now that I'm a Christian, I know it was the Holy Spirit communicating with my subconscious. Holy Spirit made that totally irrational decision. Totally irrational. And I tell you why it's totally irrational. First of all, everything that was good for me was back there behind the Iron Curtain. The wall was still up. Communism was still a force to be reckoned with. I had quite a few dollars that they saved for me in Moscow. They promised me a house. I had a family. I had a wife and a son in Germany. And, having received that decoration, the Order of the Red Banner, I would have gone home as a conquering hero. And if I stay, and any normal rational thinker would have rationalized the not staying, because there's a good chance that they were right. And if the FBI catches me, I'm no good for anybody. So I might as well leave. And I made that decision anyway, and it worked out. So that's when I'm convinced that I was meant to stay, and it wasn't my own decision.
Well, I mean, I appreciate that. There's a couple of different places I can go, but I want to circle back to, your interactions with the FBI, because you mentioned several times that you believe in God, you're a follower of Christ, you become a Christian, which is so interesting because I live in Oklahoma. So we are the belt buckle of the Bible Belt. Like, everybody goes to church. You can't trip and fall without running into 4 or 5 different churches, right? That's basically the world that I live in. And so we're marinated in it, right? Which is kind of a catch-22, because people may feel like they're a Christian just because grandma went to church, or because we listen to country music and they mention God every now and then. Like, it's that kind of a weird deal. So we have our own problems, but you grow up with basically no Christian theology. You grow up with really no one pushing you towards this creator God or this triune nature of the God. It's all right. About, communism and Marxism and whatever Vladimir Lenin says goes, and those types of things. So explain to me how you became a Christian, how you came to put your faith in Christ.
Yeah, let me give you a little more background. So,
please.
We celebrated Christmas, but it was a pagan ritual. Christ was not in the mix, not ever mentioned. Same thing, we celebrated Easter. It was all about the Easter bunny, and the colored eggs and stuff like that.
Right.
I once found a Bible in one of my grandparents' homes, and curious as I was, I opened it up and I started reading it. And somebody who has no clue, has no guidance, shouldn't read the Bible from the beginning, because I closed it when it came to the genealogy, who begat whom. I said, oh my God, this is so boring. There was not even a course in high school
We've all
or
been
college. Yeah, there wasn't not even a course in high school or college that said, there's the religion of the world, where we would be taught how religions are stupid because they were afraid that it actually might have an opposite effect. So I came to the United States knowing that Christians are pretty stupid, helpless, and they use their religion as a crutch to get through life. Yeah. Period. Yep, and I believed in this. Now, as I started working in corporate America, and I started working with people that openly declared themselves as Christians, I pretty much realized that they weren't stupid. So that stupid label didn't fit. And when I started hiring people, when I got into management, the people that actually came in and declaring their faith were actually the best people to work with. Great. So I said, okay, my prejudice is wrong. Yeah, but so they're not stupid and they're good people. But at that point, I just stopped. I became an agnostic. I said, I don't want to deal with this. That's the coward's way out, right? The way to Christianity was then engineered by God, and for which again I wasn't prepared. It's a somewhat lengthy story that could take 20 minutes to explain. But I hired myself I was a high level executive. I was chief information officer at a large energy company, and my administrative assistant had quit on me, so I needed another one. And so HR gave me a bunch of resumes, and I did some phone screens. And this one lady who did really well on the phone, she spoke with a British accent, and that's very appealing. She grew up in Jamaica, and that's how she learned how to speak English, not patois. And very intelligent. And she told me that she came to the United States as a bilingual secretary at the United Nations. I said, well, this is an interesting candidate. And then she said, oh, by the way, I'm going to college in the evenings. I'm getting a degree in Bible. So if that's a problem with you, we might not even want to have an in-person interview. And I'm thinking, oh God, I hope she's not a holy roller. That's exactly what I thought. But she was so attractive, so intelligent, and so elegant in the way she was talking. I brought her in, and HR took the interview first in a small room. And I opened the door when they told me, she's all yours now. I walk in there, and it never happened before, and it ain't going to happen again. I went like, whoa, love at first sight. Now, in hindsight, I realized that it wasn't necessarily, she's a beautiful woman. She was very beautiful. She still is. But, I've looked at so many beautiful women in my life, and that's never happened to me before. It was the glow on her face that made me fall in love. And I've seen this and I witnessed this in other people, including men. My first pastor had the same glow on his face. It's like the Holy Spirit manifesting himself in these individuals. It's rare, but she had it. And I had a colleague next to me, so we did the interview, very professional. She passed with flying colors. And in hindsight, she will tell anybody who's willing to listen that at the time she had 3 job offers. And she also claims that God talks to her in words occasionally. And she was supposed to take the job offer that came with a sign-on bonus and a regular performance bonus, which at that level is highly unusual. And the demands that she had for a salary were too high. So I said, well, maybe we close the gap with a sign-on. And this company actually paid bonuses as a policy to clerical personnel. So she took the job, and then once she started, she was told that there was another job for her, a job for God, but God didn't tell her who that was all about and what it was. Well, and so she then systematically started to evangelize me, and this was a situation where she could do this easily because we were in an open space. Nobody had an office. So, and she was sitting right across from me, and she witnessed how I treat the folks in my organization. And in between, doing work, we exchanged personal information. I was in the middle of a horrendous divorce. She was in the middle of a horrendous divorce. So we got to know each other really well. So, and one day we were required to take new employees to lunch, and I did something proactive. I said to her, "Look, by the way, I understand that you're a hardcore Christian, and I have no problem with that. But just don't you think that you ever get me to join your faith?" And this woman was bold enough to turn around and says, "You're already a Christian. You just don't know it." Prophetic, indeed. Because nowadays I'm thinking about this, and I'm sitting in church this past Sunday, and I'm thinking, how the heck was there a time in my life in my life when I wasn't a Christian? So, and then she very, very methodically began to evangelize me. One thing that where I set her up was that because she went through a horrendous divorce, and she was always cheerful and just like she was liked by everybody. And I asked her, "How do you handle all of this?" Because I was in a state of depression. And she says, "Well, it must be Jesus." Anyway, and so she was extremely methodical. She knew that for somebody like me, who was at the time primarily an intellectual thinker, I had to embrace Christian philosophy, particularly what's the word? Sometimes I'm missing words. Christian apologetics. Okay.
Right. Correct. Yeah.
So she introduced me to a radio program that was run every week by one Dr. Ravi Zacharias called "Let My People Think."
Right.
And the first time I turned it on, he spoke about something that was really, really important to me. He spoke about the moral law and how actually, because I thought of myself as a person with high morals, yet I committed crimes, literally, and I hurt people. So I struggled with that. So, and Zacharias mentioned that there's a universal moral law, no matter what religion. There's no religion that cannot accept the 10 Commandments. So, and then he spoke probably the most important sentence for me to eventually become a Christian. He said, where there is a moral law, there has to be a lawgiver.
Right.
And at that point, I accepted the existence of God, and I re-examined my belief that the Big Bang was creating something out of nothing. So I became a deist, and then Shauna, that's her name. Shauna also pointed out C.S. Lewis, and I started reading C.S. Lewis, and the C.S. Lewis logic is so forcing. You can't argument. You can't argue. You just cannot argue. And so one day I just asked her, because she always came back on Monday, how wonderful service were, and blah, blah, blah. So I asked her, so why don't you, why don't I come with you one day? And so we decided to go to a Saturday service. She was habitually late, and I was afraid to go in there. I had never been in a church other than Catholic where there was service ongoing. I didn't know what to expect. I literally was afraid that they might recognize that I'm new and that they would drag me into a room and talk to me about sharing my sins with them and giving and asking for forgiveness, or else I go to hell. So she came. We walked into service. There was music ongoing. Nobody paid attention to us. Music was nice, and then the pastor came, and he's the guy with the glow on his face. What a sermon! And clearly, that happens to a lot of Christians when you go to service and there's a good pastor preaching. You know that he's preaching exactly to you personally. And he was preaching to me, and because his theme was the love of God. And boy, did I need that, because as I indicated, I was rather depressed in those days. It's the only prolonged period of the depression I ever went through in my life, because that divorce proceeding was horrendous. And so at the end of this service, I did something that was totally uncharacteristic for me. And I went up to the pastor, and I was somewhat passive aggressive. What I really meant to say, that was one heck of a message. But I said, "You have a great delivery." And he recognized. He knew me. I'm 6'3". At the time, I was 6'3", and he never met me before. And he sensed an opportunity. He called his assistant pastor and asked me, "Can we pray over you?" So they laid hands on me, and I wasn't uncomfortable. So from that point on, I just went to church with Shauna and her son, because it was part of my healing. I wasn't a Christian yet, but the second time I showed up, the pastor gave me this booklet called The Search for Christ. I forgot the author, but that's a journalist who went on a mission to debunk the myth of Christ.
The Case for Christ by Lee Strobel?
Yeah, The Case for Christ, yes.
Yeah.
And he found nothing but evidence that Christ actually did exist.
Right.
So I read that, and as a trained scientist, I said, whoa, I still didn't become a Christian. That just happened sort of spontaneously while I was playing golf with a friend of mine. And he was looking for his ball, and I'm standing there waiting for the play to resume. I'm looking up in the sky. There were these puffy clouds, blue sky. And all the same way, the words, "I'm staying," came to me. The words, "I know Jesus, I know you're there, I know you're real, and you're my God." And then next service, they didn't have an altar call, but some force made me get up after service ended and walk up to the altar, and the pastor asked me, "What can I do for you?" And I said, I want to give my life to Christ. And that was all I remember. The rest of it was explained to me by Shauna, because I was in a zone. Yeah. Because the pastor actually took the microphone and explained to the congregation who were already leaving. He knew a little bit about my background, that I, once was a communist, and there was, blessings all around and applause. I don't remember that. And about a month later, I was baptized in water. And the interesting thing is, and one other thing, that following Easter, I gave my first testimony, admitting that I once was a KGB agent, which was somewhat foolish because I was still living. I was cooperating with the FBI at the time. I was under protection of the FBI, but I was still operating under the illegally obtained documents. So, and here I give my testimony. First, I get baptized, then I give my testimony in church, in a church where, in the area where I lived and where I worked, and nobody sort of took note. I could have been fired from my job, literally, because it was an energy company that part owned a nuclear plant, high security. They would have fired me, no problem, and nothing happened. So I'm still thinking that God protected me from this foolishness and allowed me to give my testimony.
Jack, that's so incredible. I'm so glad that you spent all that time and given us all that detail. It's always great to hear even a shorter version of somebody's testimony of how, because it's so clear on the back end. It's so clear to see that the Holy Spirit was just calling you home and bringing you closer to Father this entire time. Now, unfortunately, we're just about run out of time, but I'm going to sneak in one more question for you because I think this is so incredibly important. So, Jack, you've got a lot of listeners listening to you right now that have kids. I have a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old, so they're a little bit younger, but most of our audience are fathers with children. And they can see, especially if they let them go to the government schools, the Roman schools, that their young people are being romanced, as we talk about from the beginning of this interview. They're being romanced by the ideas of communism and socialism and Marxism. They're saying things like, yeah, I know about the tens of millions of people that died in the 20th century, but we just haven't done communism correctly yet. And don't worry, if we do it this way, it'll be fine. And no, it's not socialism. It's democratic socialism or something like that. So we only have a few minutes left here, but in a nutshell, could you give us your perspective on why it's so romantic to young people, but also what we as fathers can do to ensure that our young people are not taken up by this worldview that essentially has no foundation?
I want to quote Jordan Peterson, who actually interviewed me on his podcast. I want to quote him. He says, "The most important person in a child's life is the father." We have that responsibility, and I have a 13-year-old who has never set foot for even a second in a government school, starting with pre-kindergarten. Now, if you can't afford it, put her in a Christian school or homeschool. And if that's not a possibility, just monitor what they're being taught and just fight against it to the extent you can. Again, as I said at the beginning of the interview, the whole idea of, the team, the collective, and then everybody should be equal and all this nonsense, because we're not. We should have equal chances. But, this whole idea must be fought at the very beginning, so it doesn't get lodged in your reptilian brain, which is very, very difficult to get rid of. I went back after so many years to visit Germany, and some of my friends and colleagues that I left are still pink. They're not men. And you were 100% right. They're rationalizing communism is a good idea, but we just had the wrong leadership. And now the whole idea is to redo it. And the bottom line is, and this is not an argument you make with children, but the bottom line is every revolution that started as an honest communist revolution wound up in a murderous dictatorship.
Every single one.
Clearly, you need to be aware that there's an evil seed in man. And I'm going to do my part here. I'm working on a business model that sort of imitates Jordan Peterson. I'm trying to, we just started to collect a community and then eventually wind up in a podcast just like you and have events in person to share what I learned. This is my personal experience. It's not theory. It's the life that I lived that led me to God. And that's a voice I would hope that can be heard. And we need more voices like that.
I absolutely agree with that. And anything that we can do here at Undaunted Life to help you in that mission, we would love to do that. But Jack, we've gone everywhere in this conversation. I'm very thankful for your time, but that's all for me. Is there anything else you want to get off your chest?
Well, this my motto in life is, it sounds trite, but it is actually absolutely true. And it's 3 words: love conquers all. It's the love of Christ. It's unconditional love. It is not the love that I give you and I want something back. And that's the only way to live.
I absolutely love that. That's a great reminder for all of us. Jack Barsky, thank you for coming on Undaunted Life, a Man's podcast.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
All right, guys, I hope you enjoyed my interview with Jack Barsky, but before we let you go, we are going to do a quick resilience boost. At Undaunted Life, our mission is equipping men to push back darkness with content that forges spiritual, mental, and physical resilience. So I've got 2 links for you today. I've got a link to Jack's website. If you're a church out there, he is actually actively booking engagements where he goes and shares his testimony. You can get a hold of him through his website. And also, I've got an Amazon link to his autobiography, Deep Undercover. Thank you for listening to this podcast. Wherever you're listening to this, please subscribe, rate, and leave us a positive 5-star review. If you want me to come speak live at your event or on your podcast, just shoot me an email to info@Undaunted.Life. That's info@Undaunted.Life. Follow us on Instagram and like us on Facebook, and check out our website for everything else, including how to donate to keep more content like this coming your way. Just go to www.Undaunted.Life. And as always, we want to thank the band Holy Name for allowing us to use their music for our content. The music on this podcast is their song Perpetua, which is off their self-titled debut album on Face Down Records. The links are in the description. I'm your host, Kyle Thompson. Remember, keep pushing back darkness, keep forging spiritual, mental, and physical resilience, keep seeking the Lion of Judah.